Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you happen to be around the world, and welcome to another Solid Academy live stream. My name is Nathan Ingram. I'm the host here at Solid Academy, and I'm joined today by accessibility expert Jen Harries, who's going to be talking to us about making emails readable for everyone. Just a little bit of inside scoop here on how this live stream actually happened. We've been enjoying Jen with us for several live streams over the past few months. Jen, we've all benefited from your knowledge, and it's just you're a consistent topic in office hours and other places where folks are appreciating your content that you've brought. One of the things that came out of a recent live stream that Jen brought was Jen reached out and said, "Hey, did you know this email has some accessibility issues?" And it was, I think, was it the promotion email, Jen, or
With
the,
the promotion email.
yeah. And I mean, our marketing team is certainly not meaning to be inaccessible. So we thought, well, how can we, number one, as the solid marketing team, learn better how to do this, but also how can we just open this thing up and let everybody learn? So we've got Jen here to teach us all how to do that. So, Jen, give us a quick overview of where we're heading today.
So today is all about email, and we're going to talk about the 5 major areas where I see issues. Now, a lot of times people forget that your email shows up in a web browser. And when your content is in a web browser, WCAG applies. Accessibility laws apply. In many cases, the law specifically says you have to include social media, you have to include email. The law literally lists those 2 items out, and a lot of people don't realize, oh, shoot. Yeah, I've never actually tested any of that for WCAG. And these are mistakes that big companies are making, and I'm talking about Fortune 500 brands. These are the household names, and a lot of these emails are coming across terribly. And the big issue is that they're coming across terribly for a lot of people, not just those with disabilities. It's a huge issue, and it's really impacting email conversion rates because if I can't read it, I'm not converting. It's really simple.
Yeah, that is an excellent point. And I'm looking forward to, I have never really myself dug into this topic. So I'm really looking forward to what you have to share with us today. I am correcting a quick mistake that's there in the chat. We had the wrong link for tomorrow's live stream sign up. So that is now fixed and ready. Just a couple of notes of housekeeping before we turn it over to Jen and let her get started. First of all, this is live. We are recording this live stream, though, and the link for that replay is there in the chat. The link bundle is there waiting on you. If you've not yet opened up the Zoom chat, do that and say hi. The replay takes about an hour to render. Just as soon as it goes through all the crunching, we get that live for you. So you can go back and rewatch or share that link with anyone. There's no login required there. You can share that with anyone. And we would love if you would, because this is a great topic that I think everybody needs to know more about. Second of all, today's slides are there waiting on you in the chat if you'd like to download those. The PDF is from Google Slides and it's not accessible. So there's not a way. Jen and I were laughing about this earlier. How do you make a PDF accessible when by virtue of the topic we're dealing with inaccessible content? So yes, there are accessibility issues with the PDF
A lot
download,
of them.
many of them. So just be aware of that. And finally, we encourage you to ask questions. And to ask questions, we would invite you to use the Zoom Q&A. If you want to find that, just mouse over the shared screen and click on the Q&A icon. I'd invite you just to keep that open throughout because you can watch the questions come in and click the little thumbs up icon if you also have that question. And we'll take those questions in the order of upvotes at the end. There's already a couple of good questions in here, Jen. These will be good discussion at the end here. So let's get started learning about email accessibility.
All right. So first up, I just want to talk about an email that I got from a major brand. And so this has a few different issues. Number one, a lot of emails have their images blocked. And that's because of corporate IT policies. Google which supplies corporate email to a lot of companies, recently updated their policies on image loading in emails, and they have really decreased the number of transactional and marketing emails that are having images even load. So what that means is you need to count on your images not arriving. I have seen a number of different numbers and they vary a lot, anything from 10% to 45% of emails are arriving without images loading. And this is again due to corporate IT policies. Lots of companies block external images from loading. Many of them will block attachments from loading. And it's also people turn off intentionally their images because they don't want that data happening on their roaming data plans. So you need to assume that your images will not arrive. So here's an example from a jeans company, and save up to 40% off these styles. That doesn't convey the same thing as this image here on the right. It's just the title. It doesn't have any of the text content. The next issue is you probably notice that this text content looks kind of small. That's because on my phone, it is literally 2 inches wide. I measured it with a ruler. This whole thing is 2 inches wide, which means no, I can't read this 3-column image with all of that text on it on my phone. It's just too tiny. And I have 20/20 vision. So people who don't have 20/20 vision, they definitely can't read a thing. In that same email, they had their icons for social media, and they look like this. You can see first that the broken images, they did actually have alt text, so that was good. But everything was so smushed together, all the words just ran into each other for all of these different items. And then again, this was only an inch wide. The actual area that the social icons took up was only an inch wide. So we're talking about trying to hit this F, which is 0.1 inches wide. That is really tiny. You cannot accurately hit these tap targets. So here's another company, and this is the email when I turn off images. Here's the whole email. It's awful. I definitely would not want to. I would just click delete, probably spam. It's really, really unpleasant. What happened is they took the images. So this is actually ID underscore pre-hero dash GIF dash flash dash sale. So even if this was being read out with a screen reader, it would not be a pleasant experience. And then the next thing was they padded their email, a whole bunch of forced padding on the right and the left. So this email renders at 1.5 inches wide. That's tiny. The content, the text on here, it's just not legible. So by default, emails are accessible. The problem happens when we start making a whole bunch of changes. So many of the direct emails that we are sending back and forth are actually pretty good because we're not formatting them. We're just writing text. Maybe we're adding some bullets. Hopefully we're adding proper bullets. We might add a couple of headings, but that's it. Most of the time, these are actually coming out fine. Unless you did a fancy signature. I have seen some signatures where the entire signature is an image and they wrote no alt text. Well, again, that didn't come through great. Also, signatures are notoriously hard to make fancy and to make fancy look good because we don't control the email as it's received. We control it as we write it, but we don't control how it's received. And different email clients will modify it, they will change it, they will modify formatting, I'll see text changes, all sorts of different changes will happen. And when we try and design it and when we try and create it pretty, it's our responsibility to then make sure that it degrades well. That's a really important concept when you're sending emails, is to have it gracefully degrade, which means that if the email didn't come around right, it comes down nicely. The next thing is marketing and transactional emails. And there are 5 really common mistakes that I see happening all the time. The first one is color contrast. Just like on the web, we see a lot of color contrast issues. The second one is images. We are either not writing alt text at all, we're using images to try and convey way too much content, especially when we try and put text content into the images. We want to assume that our emails will arrive without the images. So we want to build it, write it, make sure that all of the important content is right there in the email so that people can read it. This also means that people's devices, if they have their phone set to large mode, for example, they want larger text on their phone because their eyesight isn't great. Most people who need vision correction are farsighted, which means they need reading glasses for using their phones and their computers. And guess what? People just aren't wearing their glasses all the time. So we want to make sure that if they've set to larger text and whatnot, that that will actually happen. That only happens if you coded it as actual text and not as part of the image. The next one is typography. I've seen some very interesting typography issues. Now, typography is not explicitly spelled out in WCAG, but this definitely affects how your email is received and how well the marketing works. Next up is tables. Since the beginning of email years and years ago, tables have been used to format the content. A lot of modern day email clients are still pretty limited on the formatting they accept, and so a lot of people are still using tables. In fact, I see a whole bunch of nested tables, and this causes no end to issues. If you're really trying to get it that formatted and that fancy, the odds are it's going to degrade very poorly. And then animations. Animated GIFs cannot be stopped when they're in an email, which means they are constantly blinking, flashing, changing, and it's extremely distracting. Many people literally put their hand over parts of an email that are blinking or flashing. They'll click off the email, especially if you're in a moving vehicle trying to read your email, such as if you commute to work and you're on public transit, a train, a metro, a bus, and you're transiting, you're on a moving place. And moving content on your screen makes you much more likely to get nauseous. So people will click off of your emails. So as Nathan mentioned, there was an email that prompted today's webinar, and this was the email. On the left, we have a website or email, and the email client took the background and forced dark mode on it. And here's the thing about dark mode. It doesn't always go the same on all of the different email clients and all of the different devices. So on this one, it flipped the colors, and it didn't actually flip the color on the image text. So here we have, it says register now free, but that's completely illegible because the background is this dark gray and it's on dark gray. So we can't read it. The next one, it flipped this image here. And again, it's a white with an almost white. So that's just really hard to read. Then in this case, it decided to flip the text from black to white. And so now it fails contrast. When the email was forwarded, the email didn't come through with the images. So the images that were used for these two buttons disappeared and they didn't have alt text.
So Jen, you mentioned that in particular, this email had, I mean, clearly it wasn't designed to look like this, but the email client, you said, forced a dark mode. Can you talk more about that? Why does that happen?
So email clients modify what you send. You just have to accept this. You can't control them. That's not an option. So what happened was the email client that the person was using, they had their system set to dark mode. They had their email client set to dark mode. Now, some of the email clients, when you set them to dark mode, they will maintain the background color and the foreground color if you explicitly set them. But others of the email clients, when you have dark mode on, will swap them, even if you coded that in. So if you coded that particular item, they will swap it on you. And so what happens sometimes with the images is sometimes these are PNGs and sometimes the text is actually transparent in some of them. So when the background color gets swapped on you, you lose the contrast.
Mm.
So again, a lot of different email clients will handle the overrides differently.
Interesting. So how, maybe you're going to cover this, but how, so right, I'm sensing from those watching going, well, actually, there's a comment in the chat. Paul said, this is time when it's just call it quits and open a hot dog stand, right? So like, how do you, what's the tag that says, don't change my email colors? Or how do you
don't.
prevent this from happening?
You can't. You have to
So
accept
how do you
it.
design, let me ask the question differently. How do you design in such a way that it's legible, both light mode and dark mode?
So the answer is you want to make consistent and careful choices. So here we have in this example, we've got most of our email is on a white, was designed on this like cream background, and then with dark text. So that's great. The system will say, okay, this email has a light background, dark text, swap them. Because this person likes dark mode. So I'm going to enforce that dark mode. Keep your email consistent. Don't swap out your background colors much. So if you want to, just put a horizontal line to separate sections. Really don't play with your backgrounds much. Keep them much more consistent, and then they will degrade much more consistently.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to disappear. Keep going. That's
Go ahead. Then the next one is depending on how the background is coded, because there's a lot of different ways to code a background, it may or may not flip. Depending on whether it's an image, so it flipped the images, but then this background was coded differently than the other background, and so it didn't get flipped. Again, be much more consistent about your backgrounds and try not to use the colors. Speaking of these colors, let's take a look at them. So the WCAG requirement is that colors meet a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1. However, blue and blue adjacent colors, which this purple is pretty darn blue adjacent, don't look good with a 4.5 to 1 ratio. Blue on black is pretty much one of the worst combos, and For blue on black situations, we always recommend at least 10. So here we have a different color module, and this is called APCA. And this was designed to mimic how the human eye actually sees. This is currently under consideration for inclusion in WCAG 3. That means I don't know if it will happen or not. I can't predict what's going to happen around the year 2030. I wish I could, but I can't. But what'll happen is, if this happens, we're going to have a whole bunch of currently passing colors become not passing. And the blue on black and purple, which is blue adjacent, which will also be significantly impacted. So basically purple, blue, and teal will be highly impacted. So if you're a larger brand and you want to really make sure that your colors work well, you definitely want to take a look at APCA, because this makes it much more how the human eye perceives. And the human eye is perceiving this, which is not great. And here it will tell you that it failed. I like this one because it's very straightforward. It just says failed. And then here it will show you in this chart the numbers where it would actually pass. And if we are looking at 400, which is a common font weight, we would have to have our font size at 36 pixels in order for it to pass. So that's not really great. So in general, I would recommend just not using this background color, because in order to get this background color to pass for font size 400 and 16 pixels, I have to take this background to almost completely very, very pale purple. So here is a more recent email, and you'll see that there have been some fixes. Right now we have the register buttons are now actually buttons in the email. They're links that are formatted to look like a button. And it's doing a lot better. But you'll see here on the phone that this text is pretty small and pretty hard to read. And the reason why is this body is set to 650 pixels. It's hard set, which means that the content goes to 650 pixels and then the phone smushes that down. So you don't want to set a width or a minimum width, because that's not really going to go well on the phones. And let's face it, a lot of people check their email on their phone. I know I do. And again, here on the phone, when the font got really downscaled, this is pretty darn hard to read. And then this even smaller text down here, oh, that really is testing my vision. The next item, emojis. I know a lot of companies love to put emojis in, but here's what they look like to a screen reader. It reads out heading level 2, FW, level 1. It actually reads out caution. Then it reads out, to get missing image descriptions, open the context menu, unlabeled image, and then it reads out the rest of it, weekly vulnerability report, 345 vulnerabilities. And so here's why that happened. In the image, they set a data emoji, and the alt text is actually an emoji symbol. Alt text should be text. It shouldn't be an emoji symbol. ARIA label is redundant on alt text. So I would remove the ARIA label. But if for some reason you did need an ARIA label, it needs to also be text. So remove the ARIA label and make the alt text an actual description. In this case, I would probably actually make the alt text empty, intentionally empty, because I don't necessarily want, a lot of times the emojis are there for decorative purposes, and we don't necessarily want to read out some of those words. For example, sometimes it's a firework symbol, and that reads off as explosion. Maybe that wasn't what we actually meant to have read out. So now here we have, for example, this would probably be read out as a spaceship or something like that. That doesn't really make sense in the context of this heading. Forward, spaceship. What does a spaceship have to do with this? Double your storage plus 2 months free. That doesn't make a lot of sense in context. In context, having empty alt text makes the most sense. Now, here we have an issue with the tables. Now, these tables were updated and the table was set to role presentation or role none. Both of those are acceptable. That looks like a table tag. The word role equals either none or presentation. And that was set right. But the issue here on this email is we have a whole bunch of tables and nested tables. So what happened when it got forwarded, we have one part of the email is set to the width of 650 and another part of the email is not. So these two areas of the email rendered differently. And so we end up with a bunch of white space and this kind of misalignment. This was how it was intended to arrive. And then here we have the next one. And again, I would change out this purple background. It does meet the technical requirements. However, it doesn't go great for human eyes. At the top, we have a banner that's up top, and that actually kind of introduces the subject of the email. However, what was that one? Solid. Free live stream. Anyway, this image up here isn't even showing up as a broken image. I think it might have been inserted as a background. I did try reading through the code and I wasn't able to find this image quickly. But this image did actually have text content in it, which was useful. But unfortunately, it got removed when the image wasn't loaded. All right. Nathan, you want to tell me about our questions?
Yes. All right. So this is really interesting, getting under the hood of some of these emails. And I think, especially so far for me, the big takeaway is the banded text, like we're seeing here, where we're alternating light and dark backgrounds. That seems to be just in general something to completely avoid. Am I right on that?
I would definitely avoid that. I like to just do a simple horizontal line, just basic HTML, horizontal line across it, and just use that to visually break up the sections.
Yeah. So how do you answer, let's just hypothetically, somebody is working with a client, right? And I'm sure this would never happen in the real world, but let's just say this hypothetical client says they must have their branded colors throughout an email like this. How do you talk to a client about this?
So I have done for some clients, what I'll do is I will actually do an image for their horizontal line break. So I will actually put in an image. So what I'll do is I'll put the image right in the middle, and then I'll have the colored line to match the branding on either side of it. So it becomes this really pretty visual break if you've got the images on. But if it's not there, it's fine still.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, some of this honestly is I had no idea. I'm not a dark mode person. I had no idea that a client, an email client, would completely just
Modify it.
destroy a layout like
Yeah.
that.
It's really about the planning for graceful degradation.
Yeah.
So whatever you've modified, whatever you've changed, whatever you've coded, it's now your responsibility to gracefully degrade that.
Yeah.
So honestly, I use a lot of, if possible, really simple divs with very little inline CSS on them because I just want to keep the kind of the content as simple as possible. So I will frequently use something like a max width on the div. So to prevent it from going too wide. Typically, I don't go above 800 pixels because then you get into issues with the line being so long, it's actually harder to read.
Yep.
So it's also really common somewhere around 600, 650 to set that as the max width. And
Right.
max width is definitely your friend because max width just says, okay, not wider than this. That's fine. Let it go. You can, if you want to, you can set a max width relative to the font size. So it becomes a whole discussion on whether you should use pixels or rems. Frequently, what I will do is I will set a max width using for a line length because the point of setting a maximum line length is to have a maximum number of words on a line, to literally limit the number of words. So in this case, I do sometimes use rem to set that because my purpose, especially if I'm dealing with someone who's lower vision, they may have a larger font size set up. So the intent of limiting the number of words on the line would work well using rem because I will set a certain number of rem for the width and then it's all set.
Interesting. All right, folks, let's get to your questions now. If you have a question to ask and you've not yet asked it, just open up the Zoom Q&A. Also, open it up and just scan down that list of questions and upvote any questions that you would like to see the answers to. This is really, really interesting. So some of this is, I mean, I think there's some friction with
Yes.
web developers when it comes to accessibility. Right or wrong, I
Mhm.
mean, there's friction. It's like you're telling me something that it's extra trouble and I've got to do, and there's friction there. So
Less is more.
yeah, well, and that's the
Especially
thing.
in email, the less you do, the less you have to do. Less is more.
Yeah, but these are particularly, again, back to the dark mode thing. That's eye-opening to me because I don't want to, accessibility aside, I'm pro accessibility 100%, right? But accessibility aside, I want my emails to be readable by people. And
Yes.
clearly, there are simple things that we may have all been doing that render them possibly unreadable. And I just pulled a statistic, it was from Google, so it must be right, right? Like 83% of Android users use dark mode on their phone. That's a
Yep.
massive amount. I had no idea.
Dark mode, especially on phones, is really popular for two reasons. One, a lot of times people might be using their phone in lower light settings, such as in the evening. And two, it conserves battery.
Hmm.
If you have
Yeah,
your phone set
it
to dark
does.
mode, it's a battery conservation.
Interesting. Okay, well, I've kibitzed here long enough. Let's go to Paul's question here first. Paul says, I thought there were complaints about white on black or black on white being too much of a contrast. Is that true or not true?
That is true. So in the contrast ratio, if we have a pure white FFF and we have pure black 000, that is a contrast of 21. That's the maximum contrast you can have using the WCAG contrast system. So with that, people with dyslexia, Erland syndrome, generally people who have more reading difficulties, and older people will frequently find that either more difficult to read. It may exacerbate issues. For example, with Erland syndrome, it will exacerbate issues and make basically take your phone, hold it in front of you, and bounce. And that's about what people dealing with Erland syndrome deal with when
Wow.
it's super high contrast. So I find that if I knock down to about a contrast of 18, that's really nice. That will knock it out for quite a few people, and people who have older eyes, more tired eyes, people who've been sick, etc. It'll just be gentler on them. So I try to aim for a max contrast of 18. And if you use my contrast tool on my site, you will actually get told if your contrast is too high. So I can grab that link and drop it into the chat.
Excellent.
So I have the quick contrast. And there's also a more detailed contrast one, but this is just the really quick contrast. And so here it tells you too high. So I have E with 0, 0, 0, 0. Oh,
That
I
link
just
is
sent
now in the
that to,
chat for everyone. I've got it. It's
sorry, I
there for
sent it to
everyone
host
now.
and panelist by accident.
And I rolled into the questions here, Jen, without referencing your website. It's been in the link bundle throughout the live stream today, but easyalleyguide.com is your website where there are many things.
But yeah,
Lots of
if
tools,
we
and
just
you consult with the
knock,
web agencies as well, correct?
yes, I do. I have specific packages just for them, help them get going with web accessibility. If you hop to the top of my site, there's a green bar, and there is a download that you can grab for agencies specifically.
Very good. Okay, Jeffrey's question here. This was at the very beginning. He says, maybe you'll cover this, but many of my clients use MailChimp for newsletters. Do they have good default? Are there any platforms for email that are better than others out of the box for accessibility? Or how about MailChimp in particular?
So there are so many templates, and there are so many archived templates that have been around forever. It really depends on the template. You have to take a look at each of the templates and see how each of them are for accessibility. Because I can't give you a general answer, because some people have been copying a MailChimp newsletter
For
since
10 years.
2015.
Right.
And honestly, some of those may actually even be better than some of the current ones, but it's so much template based with any of these systems. The less they're doing, probably the better, but you have to actually take a look at them and inspect them.
So
So
what?
I can
Yeah.
pull up one of the emails. For example, here we are. So this was the solid security. And if another item while we're here, underlines should only be used for links. If it's underlined, everyone and their cousin will click on it. So here we have, and I'm going to pull up the web inspector, and we're going to note that we are pretty far margined in on the left. And the reason is we have a table. Inside of that, we have a table inside of a table with another table inside a table. So there's a lot of tables that got put into this email. And they did, correctly. Let me find one of the tables. So they were correctly putting role none, but on some of them, they explicitly put the width 650. And so that width 650 was what caused it to look super shrunk down on the mobile device. So we'd get rid of that. Well, and about half the tables, at least. Generally speaking, unless I really, really want to put content side by side in an email, I don't use a table. I just let it go down as a div if I really needed a background color, maybe a div inside it, and that's about it. Otherwise, it's just headings, text, links, etc. going down. Drop an image in where it's appropriate, and always make sure that the image isn't important to the email's understandability.
Mm. So we had several questions related to different uh, email platforms, MailChimp, Constant Contact, et cetera, et cetera. So in evaluating the templates that they're, start from scratch,
Yeah.
how would you, in my head, that would look like maybe opening up the HTML view of this, making sure we're using divs that have a max width, those sorts of things?
Yes. So what I would do is I would start with the big five. So start with your color contrast. Then check to make sure that it works with images off. Make sure that the typography is degrading nicely. So here on typography, here we have font family, and it says Roboto, Helvetica Neue, Helvetica, Arial, Sans Serif. So what's been done right is they ended with a web safe font and sans serif. I would have probably dropped Helvetica Neue and either Helvetica or Arial. I would put the font that I really want, such as Roboto, and then I would put in one of the web safe fonts. Just use one. There's no need to use multiples. Helvetica and Arial are also almost identical. They're so similar. And then finally drop the sans serif at the end. So if you have a special font you want to use that's not part of WebSafe, put that first, then one WebSafe font, then either your sans serif or your serif. And do that for your font families.
Mm-hmm.
And I also always recommend that you put your line height in rems, because I want, if the person has decided to use larger text, I want that larger text to keep its line spacing. If we set it in pixels, then the text loses its line spacing and starts getting all smushed together as the font size increases. And then tables, if possible, I would get rid of the tables. And if not possible, make sure that they're limited and they use role presentation or role none. And then kill any animations and make sure that any emojis that you have are, one, really limited in their use, and two, make sure that they're properly coded for alt text.
Yeah, there's a particular newsletter I get that I think they use an emoji on every single line. They went to a course somewhere that said use emojis for email convert or something. But yeah. Another good question here from Doug. Doug says, I would love for WCAG to clearly define typography guidelines, maybe soon. In the meantime, what recommendation can I give my clients about typography in an email blast to their customers?
Generally speaking, I will use one rem for my font size, because that then goes with whatever the device uses for its default font size, which is pretty much going to be when the person hits Command N for a new email, that's what they're going to get for their font size. So that's most people have actually set that because they get that on every single new email that they write. So they normally do, in fact, set that. Failing that, you can just use 16 pixels. Again, I do prefer REMs, but you can use 16 pixels. Not every email sending system has the option for REMs.
Hmm. Is there a particular font that's better than others?
I personally like Verdana. It is pretty much my favorite personal font. So here I have the font examples. And so these are first the WebSafe fonts, and then after them I have some choices from Google Fonts. But I personally like Verdana, and when I've asked a number of people from the WebSafe fonts what they find most readable, especially when I ask them to read text they've never seen before, almost everyone picks Verdana. They say that is actually the easiest of the different WebSafe fonts to read.
Interesting. You could, I mean, just setting it aside Tahoma there, you can definitely see the letter space. It's not technically letter
Yeah,
spacing, but it's actually the
it
X
is.
height of the font makes it
Yep,
more readable.
exactly. So here you can see the Helvetica, and then here you can see the Verdana. And it's just a little gentler, a little easier to read for the vast majority of people.
Hmm. Interesting. Paul would like to know, is there a way to tell with, I think he means conversion, can you directly connect conversion with accessibility?
You can test for yourself. Obviously, there's no one number that will be the be all end all of everything. The Norman Nielsen group does have a, huge swath of studies on their website. Lots and lots of different studies they've done on all sorts of different things. But anecdotally, I kind of cleaned up and simplified some of my clients' newsletters, and they did see higher conversion rates with simpler, easier to digest emails.
Hmm. Interesting. Oh, Ben has a question about email signatures. I mean, I would guess just
The
personally,
simpler, the better.
yeah, like I would say 1 in 3 email signatures that I get from someone in professional emails are missing, or there's a broken image or something. Um, any examples of acceptable signatures? You said the simpler the better. Can you elaborate?
The simpler, the better. A lot of times for clients, if they want, max visibility on their signature, we just do everything as text. Some email clients will start flagging things for spam if you put too many links in. So really cut the number of links down to only a couple. The other problem with putting too many links in there is an analysis paralysis. You give people too many options, they don't make any decisions. So you really want to cut it off at about 2 links. What do you really want the person to do?
Hmm.
And then just go ahead and continue with that.
So Ben mentions in the chat, so you wouldn't recommend images of someone's face, for example, in an email.
Honestly, I would not. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is just because the image may or may not make it through, you've added another link. Um, Depending on how everything went and where that image is actually hosted, that could be an attachment that's being attached to the email, that could be coming from a website. I know one marketing company had a massive issue when a website was hacked, and they were actually It was one of
Oh,
their little side websites, and but they were hosting a whole bunch of people's images for their email signatures all on that server. And
right.
so that got flagged for malware, and then every email that had those image links going to there all got flagged. And then the domain got started getting hit and blacklisted, and it was this whole cascading nightmare.
Hmm.
So you don't want that.
I, I, th-
Um,
I think we've
but
all seen,
also,
go ahead.
especially when you're emailing someone that, you may not have met in person, you may not have been on a personal Zoom call with, putting images on, I've found can start prejudices and can start changing the way someone interacts with you. Because, for example, I had been working with a company as one of their white label developers for a while, and several clients had come to the conclusion that I was male, and they somehow read Jen, and in their brain, every time they read it, it got changed to Jean,
Oh,
which is a common male name. And I always wrote back technical, concise responses. And so in their head, they had this concept of who I was. And then at one point they wanted to add images. And so they grabbed my Gravatar image. And then suddenly a whole bunch of clients were all upset because they discovered that I wasn't who they thought I was.
interesting. Yeah, I
But
can't tell
just
you how
in
many.
in general, I've found that people are more likely to start putting prejudices in when you start adding photos.
Mhm. I, so many emails come in where they have, little logos or any, and they come in as email attachments, and some of
Yes.
them are gigantic. There's just not a lot of thought being put in to signatures in general. So this is it's good to think about this.
Well, people are trying to, what happens is they're like, oh, maybe we could add this to the signature. Maybe we could add that. Maybe we could add this other thing. Can we just add 20 more items? No, because all you did was create analysis paralysis, and now no one is interacting. A few people, they tossed the big complex signature and put one link in there. And they actually found it got clicked far more often because people stopped having this giant analysis paralysis issue.
Hmm. I mean, that's the same usability issue as having five links in your hero area versus the one
Exactly.
primary call to action. Uh,
Exactly. Simplify it down.
so I'm going to keep going just for sake of time here. I'm going to scroll down the list. We just have a few minutes left. The next question I've got here is from an anonymous attendee. Any recommendations on how companies can use their branding or colors suitably? You mentioned the separator that you would create as an
Yeah.
image, or any other ideas on how color could be used and not create these issues?
So it's going to depend somewhat on your brand colors. If you, for example, look at Barbie, they use almost no fluorescent pink because fluorescent pink is just not a great color for reading. You really don't want to read fluorescent pink text. You really don't want to read text on a fluorescent pink background. Let's just be honest. It's not a great experience. So they keep their branding pretty sparse, and they keep their branding on their images. So what they do is they really focus on getting your pops of pink with their images and with some colored accents that they have on their site. So you know what, really, especially if you have, those really bright colors, bring them in as accents, bring them in as separators, tie them in a little bit here and there. You don't have to go all out to still tie it back to your brand.
Mm,
If
it's
you
good
do
advice.
happen to have, a blue color or, a nice, easy to read color, go ahead and make that for your buttons. Go ahead and enjoy that on your buttons. But otherwise, tie it in as accents. You'll still get it repeated several times throughout the email. It still ties back to the brand. It just does it gently.
Interesting. Phoebe has a question here. Phoebe says, I think I have the ability to set the background of my newsletter using CSS. If I use important, would that override dark mode?
You'd have to test it with a lot of different email clients to find out.
Yeah. Because there's no standard, right?
No, there's not.
That's really frustrating.
It might work, but the reality is you just have to test it with a lot of different clients.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of testing, Ben would like to know in MailChimp, if you've used it, does the inbox preview feature, is it helpful? Is it useful to sorting out some of these things?
I always actually send the email to an email address as a test, and I actually pull it up on a phone. I actually pull it up in a browser. I actually look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Q would like to know if you have any thoughts on the Open Dyslexic font.
I would never use that in an email except possibly to make a point. The Open Dyslexic font is not pleasant for most people to read.
Yeah. Yeah. And Google that, folks, and you'll see it is created for people with dyslexia to be able to read easier, but it is quite difficult to
Yes.
well, no, not difficult. Your word was better. It's not pleasant to read.
Yes. So here is a website, and it's now all in Open Dyslexic. It's just not a pleasant experience for the majority of people.
Hmm.
Versus you pop it over to Verdana and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, for most people, this is going to be a much more pleasant experience.
Nice. Sue would like to know, here's our final question. Can you speculate or guess what percentage of people need visual or other accommodations?
So in the United States, 79% of US adults need some sort of vision correction. The majority of them are farsighted, which means they need reading glasses. So you're probably looking at about half the population needs vision correction to read their phone.
Hmm. And that's a big deal. You know, I am actually nearsighted, but and I'm wearing progressive lenses here because I'm an old geezer, but I still have to take my glasses off and hold my phone close because I can't really get comfortable with any part very easily to do any kind of lengthy reading on my phone. And a small texted email is just brutal. Yeah.
As a general rule, the older your audience, the more important accessibility is.
Hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Oh, Sue was asking if you had any thought ideas of statistics on people with more severe disabilities than just reading glasses.
There are lots of those. If you go to the Learn section on my site, I have Intro to Accessibility, and that's got a whole bunch of statistics in that presentation.
Yeah, good. And this is a good segue to wrap up. Jen, tell us about Easy Accessibility Guide, what you offer, the tools you have. I know there's some paid courses as well, I believe you're offering. Tell us a little bit about that as we're wrapping up.
Yes. So Easy Ally Guide is my website and my company. And we've got a resource that people can grab pretty easily at the top. And that is the Agency Accessibility Guidebook. And that is designed for all of the agencies who are saying, okay, I've got some of the basics. How do I progress? How do I get to the next step? What is the next step? And then I've also got the actual product, which is my agency accessibility system, which is specifically for agencies. And what this is a whole set of processes. It includes office hours, it includes some tools, it includes a one-on-one call where I actually talk you through where your agency is at, what you need to do next, how to help you with selling, how to help you make progress through accessibility. And of course, the SOPs, the standard operating procedures for lots of different things of the how do I do this step? How do I get through this item? All of the hows.
Very good. Jen, thanks once again for your wisdom on this topic. Yeah, a lot of thanks going there in the chat as well. Any final thoughts as we're wrapping up?
If you find this topic really daunting, just remember, the simpler it is, the less you have to test and the less you have to worry about it degrading.
That's
So
a
keep
great
it
takeaway.
simple.
Great takeaway. Well, thanks again, Jen. Folks, we'll have this replay up in it takes about an hour for the video to render. Just as soon as that finishes, we'll get that up for you. Jen, I need to get that slide link from you one more time with the updated slides. I neglected to update that for folks. So if you could shoot that over to me, that would be awesome. And folks, thanks again for being with us today. Once again, I'm going to drop the link bundle in the chat here. That has the live stream registration link for our course tomorrow with Beth Hannon, talking about legal requirements for web accessibility, especially focusing on the new laws coming in the EU. So that's tomorrow, 1 o'clock Central, here on Solid Academy, where we go further together.